Did you know that Daniel was 80 years old when he was thrown into a lion's den? It's hard to believe, but he spent 6 days there and emerged without a scratch. How did he manage that? And what led him to such a situation? In this video, we'll dive into the story of Daniel and the lion's den, uncovering all the profound meanings it holds. The story of Daniel begins in the 6th century BCE, during a turbulent time in the ancient Near East. Daniel was a young noble from Judah, born into a prominent Jewish family. His life took a dramatic turn when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon besieged Jerusalem in 605 BCE, taking many of its inhabitants into exile. Daniel was likely just a teenager at the time, one of the captives taken to Babylon. Even as a captive, Daniel stood out for his remarkable qualities. The Bible tells us that King Nebuchadnezzar instructed Ashpenaz, the chief of his court officials, to select young men from the Israelites, specifically from the royal family and nobility, to serve in his court. This indicates that Daniel was indeed part of Judah's royal lineage. The chosen young men had to meet strict criteria. They needed to be without physical defects, attractive, quick to learn, well-versed in various forms of knowledge, and capable of serving in the king's palace. Ashpenaz was tasked with teaching them the language and literature of the Babylonians. Unlike the other captives, these young men were given daily rations of food and wine from the king's table to ensure they were well nourished. Their training would last for 3 years, after which they would officially enter the king's service. Daniel was among those selected, chosen for his intellect, wisdom, and noble heritage. This marked the beginning of his service within the Babylonian government. To understand the full significance of this, we need to go back to the book of Isaiah, as one of his prophecies had just come to pass. Daniel was born during the reign of King Josiah, a time when Judah was undergoing a spiritual revival. However, after Josiah's death, the nation quickly fell into rebellion, making God's judgment unavoidable. Over a century earlier, the prophet Isaiah had warned, "Behold, the days are coming when everything in your house, and all that your fathers have stored up until this day, will be carried to Babylon. Nothing will be left, and they will take away some of your descendants, whom you will father, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy by deporting Jerusalem's most promising youths as captives, with Daniel being one of them. The Bible does not give us much insight into Daniel's family. We don't know if they were aware of Isaiah's prophecy or recognized it as it unfolded. One can only imagine the whirlwind of emotions they must have felt as Daniel was taken from them. Did you know that by seizing all the items of worship, Nebuchadnezzar was also sending a powerful message? By taking these sacred objects and placing them in a Babylonian temple, he was essentially declaring, "My God is superior to your God." At this point, it was up to the God of Israel to vindicate himself. Daniel, along with his 3 friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, later renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, was subjected to 3 years of intense training. While you might expect absolute obedience from someone in Daniel's position, drafted into royal service despite being a captive, Daniel was different. He made a firm decision to avoid the royal food and wine given to the king's elect, as he believed it would defile him. The Bible tells us that he requested permission from the chief official to abstain from these provisions. Now, imagine you're King Nebuchadnezzar. A captive under your rule is refusing the finest food and drink, a direct gift from your table. These were offerings meant to honor them, and it wouldn't be unreasonable for such a refusal to lead to harsh punishment, perhaps even execution. So, what drove Daniel to take this bold stand? There are a few possible reasons for Daniel's choice. First, some of the foods offered may have been prohibited under Jewish law, as outlined in Leviticus 11. The law forbids the consumption of pigs and horses, which were both common in Babylonian cuisine. Additionally, while wine isn't considered unclean under Jewish law, it's possible that the wine had been offered to Babylonian gods, or that Daniel might have taken a Nazirite vow to abstain from it altogether. Another explanation is that Jewish law forbids the consumption of meat sacrificed to false gods. This became a significant issue later on and was a major controversy in the early Christian churches, as mentioned by Apostle Paul. Although there is limited evidence that this was an issue in the Old Testament period, it's still a plausible concern for Daniel. But perhaps the most compelling reason is symbolic. Eating the king's food could be seen as a sign of allegiance to Nebuchadnezzar. In those times, sharing food was a way of forming bonds and alliances. King Jehoiakim, for instance, accepted the king's food, signifying his loyalty to Babylon. Daniel 11:26 even warns against those who partake in the rich foods of a foreign king, hinting at the risks of such associations. For Daniel, accepting the food might have symbolized a dependence on the king rather than on God. Daniel didn't resist the king's training or the adoption of a new name, but he firmly rejected the king's food as it symbolized dependence on Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel placed his reliance solely on the Lord. Thus, he resolved not to eat the royal provisions, committing himself entirely to this decision. Understanding the implications, Daniel chose what he believed was right and stood by it. Determined, he decided to eat only vegetables and drink water to avoid defiling himself. He and his friends chose to subsist on simple foods grown from seeds, refusing whatever elaborate meals the king offered. The chief official responsible for the king's chosen ones wasn't convinced. He feared that without the royal food, Daniel and his friends would appear weaker than the others, potentially costing him his life. "I am afraid of my lord the king," he told Daniel, "who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." In response, Daniel proposed a test. "Please test us for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food and deal with your servants according to what you see." The official agreed, and they were tested for 10 days. After the 10 days, Daniel and his friends appeared healthier and better nourished than all the young men who had been eating the royal food. Seeing the results, the guard removed the king's food and wine from their diet, providing them with vegetables instead. For these 4 young men, God granted not only physical well-being, but also exceptional knowledge and understanding in all areas of literature and learning. Daniel, in particular, was given the ability to interpret visions and dreams. When the training period set by the king ended, the chief official brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them and found none who could compare to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They officially entered the king's service, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king questioned them about, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters across his entire kingdom. Daniel and his friends were truly set apart by God. Over time, Daniel served under 4 different kings. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, his son Belshazzar took the throne, followed by Kings Darius and Cyrus. Remarkably, Daniel continued his service in Babylon through the first year of King Cyrus's reign. You might wonder why Nebuchadnezzar would choose captives to be trained and brought into his government. Why give them new names, provide special food, and treat them almost like royalty? Couldn't there be a risk that these captives might eventually turn against him and bring Babylon down from the inside? The strategy was simple. Nebuchadnezzar aimed for total indoctrination. By controlling what they ate, what they learned, and even their names, he sought to strip away their connection to the Hebrew God and culture. Nebuchadnezzar's goal was clear. He wanted these young men to depend on him for everything, shifting their loyalty away from their God and towards Babylon. Daniel and his friends, however, refused to be swayed. They remained determined to look to God alone. While most of the Jewish captives, including the prophet Ezekiel, were sent to refugee settlements to work as laborers, a select few, those with unique qualities, were given the opportunity to work in the king's palace. Nebuchadnezzar chose Daniel and his friends for their youth, lineage, physical perfection, and exceptional wisdom. They were descendants of Israel's royalty and nobility, without physical blemishes and quick to understand, making them ideal candidates for service and indoctrination in the language and literature of the Chaldeans. This strategy aimed to undermine Israel's future. If these young men were eventually freed, their loyalty might still belong to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's hope was that they would be too indoctrinated to rebuild their own nation. But Daniel didn't succumb to this plan. He sought to understand the timing of God's promise for Israel's deliverance. Likely still a teenager when Jerusalem fell, Daniel had the physical, intellectual, and social qualities that set him apart. By bringing these young men into his court, Nebuchadnezzar not only showcased his dominance over Judah, but also added their knowledge to his own ranks. Judah might have been devastated, but God's purpose for Daniel was just beginning. Thanks to his remarkable abilities, Daniel quickly rose through the ranks in the Babylonian court. His reputation was solidified when he demonstrated his unique gift for interpreting dreams and visions. The first notable instance occurred when King Nebuchadnezzar had a deeply unsettling dream that he couldn't understand. Desperate for answers, the king summoned his magicians but demanded an impossible task. He wanted them not only to interpret the dream, but also to tell him what he had dreamed. He insisted, "I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Tell me the dream and then interpret it for me." Nebuchadnezzar wanted absolute certainty, but his demand was beyond anyone's ability. Furious with their failure, the king ordered the execution of all Babylon's wise men, including Daniel. This crisis was what brought Daniel into the spotlight. Daniel turned to God in prayer, and God revealed both the dream and its meaning to him. Daniel presented the interpretation to the king, which impressed Nebuchadnezzar so much that he elevated Daniel to a high-ranking position, showered him with gifts, and made him ruler over Babylon's entire province, placing him in charge of all the wise men. Though Daniel's success was undeniable, it also attracted envy. As he continued to rise in authority, he gained many enemies among those who resented his influence. These individuals would eventually conspire to have Daniel thrown into the lion's den. Daniel's journey to the lion's den took place during the reign of King Darius. Here's how it unfolded. Darius appointed 120 senators, or satraps, to govern across the vast kingdom of Babylon. At that time, Babylon was the largest city in the world, spanning 2,200 acres and boasting a population of over 200,000, the first city in history to reach such numbers. To manage these satraps, Darius set up a hierarchy with 3 administrators overseeing them, one of whom was Daniel. Daniel's exceptional abilities soon set him apart. His performance was so impressive that Darius considered promoting him to oversee the entire kingdom. This did not sit well with the other administrators and satraps. Jealous and threatened by Daniel's influence, they began searching for any possible fault in his management. Despite their efforts, they found nothing. Daniel was both trustworthy and diligent, with no trace of corruption or negligence in his work. Let's pause to appreciate the level of integrity Daniel maintained. Imagine scrutinizing a public servant who has held office for decades and finding absolutely nothing, no scandals, no financial misconduct, no dubious deals, no shady gifts from lobbyists, not even a single accusation from colleagues. Daniel's life was examined with the finest comb, and yet his enemies found nothing to criticize. Left with no other options, they resorted to fabricating charges against him. This spotless record doesn't mean Daniel was without sin, but it speaks to his extraordinary integrity. He lived his life with such professionalism and moral clarity that it stood out to others. The testament to Daniel's character here isn't self-promotion, it comes from the judgment of those around him. While people may not understand the intricacies of religious devotion or spiritual doctrines, they can easily recognize qualities like selfishness, dishonesty, and arrogance. Alexander McLaren once noted, "The world is a very poor critic of my Christianity, but it is a very sufficient one of my conduct." Daniel's opponents knew him well enough to understand that he would never be swayed from his faith in God, regardless of the situation. They knew he could not be lured into wrongdoing, but they also knew he would stay loyal to his God under any circumstance. This should make every believer pause and reflect. Could others say the same about them? Daniel's enemies, fueled by jealousy, wanted nothing more than to bring him down. They finally concluded, "We'll never find any reason to accuse Daniel unless it's related to the law of his God." This tells us that Daniel was open about his faith and his devotion to God. So the administrators and satraps plotted together, approaching King Darius with a proposal. "May King Darius live forever," they said. All the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should issue a decree. Anyone who prays to any god or man other than you, O king, for the next 30 days shall be thrown into the lion's den. They insisted the king put the decree in writing, making it irrevocable according to the law of the Medes and Persians. And so, King Darius signed it into law. Did you know this wasn't the first time a Babylonian king demanded divine reverence? Nebuchadnezzar, for example, once commissioned a massive golden statue, 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide, set up on the plain of Dura. He then commanded all the officials to attend the dedication and fall down in worship of the statue or face dire consequences. A proclamation went out declaring, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace." Miraculously, Daniel and his friends survived this ordeal, and it's likely this experience gave Daniel the courage to stand firm during King Darius's reign. Upon hearing that the decree had been signed, Daniel returned home to his upstairs room, where the windows faced Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he knelt and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had always done. You might wonder, what was Daniel's prayer routine like? His practice held 6 key elements. First, he prayed in his upper room, a private setting with no intent to impress others. Second, he prayed with his windows open toward Jerusalem, showing his devotion to the place of sacrifice, even in the absence of the physical temple. Third, Daniel's prayer was grounded in Scripture. In 1 Kings 8, Solomon had asked God to hear the prayers of his people when they prayed toward Jerusalem and the temple. Daniel honored this tradition. Fourth, he knelt on his knees, a posture of humility shared by Jesus, Stephen, Peter, Paul, and Luke in their prayers. Fifth, Daniel prayed 3 times a day, recognizing that while occasional prayer has its place, consistent prayer is even better. Despite being a governor over an empire, Daniel still made time to pray. Sixth, he prayed with gratitude. Great prayer is marked by thanksgiving. As Spurgeon once put it, prayer and praise should always go up to heaven, arm in arm, like twin angels walking up Jacob's ladder, or like kindred aspirations soaring up to the Most High. In staying faithful to his routine, Daniel unwittingly fell into the trap his enemies had set for him. They gathered together and found him praying and seeking God's help. Seizing the opportunity, they hurried to the king, reminding him of the decree. Did you not publish a decree that for the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king affirmed, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. The accusers then informed the king, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah has shown no regard for you, your majesty, or for the decree you signed. He continues to pray 3 times a day. Hearing this, the king was deeply distressed. He wanted to rescue Daniel and worked tirelessly until sundown to find a way out. It's important to note that Daniel didn't let the decree alter his actions in any way. He didn't increase or decrease his prayer time. He simply carried on with his established practice. Doing less would have been a compromise, and doing more could have appeared as pride. Daniel wasn't seeking martyrdom. He was simply continuing the faithful prayer life that had long been his routine. While they accused Daniel of disrespecting the king, this wasn't true. Daniel's choice reflected not a lack of respect for Darius, but rather a higher respect for God. King Darius showed an admirable trait here. He was displeased with himself rather than placing the blame on others. He knew he was at fault, and though he surely resented the schemers, he accepted responsibility for the situation. Like King Darius, we often find ourselves haunted by our poor choices. Sometimes, all we can do is pray and ask God for mercy and miraculous intervention. Darius worked tirelessly until sunset, trying to find a way to save Daniel, but to no avail. According to ancient custom, executions were carried out on the evening of the day when accusations were confirmed. The conspirators returned to Darius, reminding him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." With no other option, the king reluctantly gave the order, and Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Darius spoke to him, saying, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was rolled over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and those of his nobles, ensuring that Daniel's fate could not be altered. That night, Darius returned to his palace, where he neither ate nor sought any form of entertainment. He was so troubled that he couldn't sleep. If Darius truly cared for Daniel, why didn't he simply cancel the decree? In the Medo-Persian Empire, once a law was enacted, it was considered irreversible due to the principle of the law of the Medes and Persians. This concept of unchangeable laws was a core part of their legal and political system. Despite his affection for Daniel, Darius felt bound by this law and reluctantly enforced the punishment. Still, he held on to hope, expressing faith that Daniel's God might protect him. In the end, Daniel was indeed saved from the lions through a miraculous intervention. At this point, Daniel was likely between 70 and 80 years old. By examining the reigns of Babylonian kings, we know that Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem between 604 and 605 BCE, taking many, including Daniel, as captives. Daniel would have been a teenager at that time, as it was customary for Babylon to train young men in their ways. By pinpointing the year of his captivity and understanding his age during that event, we can estimate the timeline of the major events in his life based on these historical markers. For instance, the Bible tells us that after King Belshazzar was slain, King Darius took the throne and appointed Daniel as the head of his advisors. Historically, this occurred around 539 or 538 BCE, placing Daniel's age at approximately 65 to 70. This is also when Daniel was cast into the lion's den. Based on these events, it's likely Daniel lived another 15 years after his miraculous escape, making him about 80 to 85 when he passed away. It's interesting that King Darius personally sealed the den. This act may have been intended to protect Daniel as much as to prevent any intervention. Darius likely knew that Daniel had powerful enemies who wouldn't hesitate to kill him if the lions didn't. Meanwhile, Daniel probably enjoyed a better night's rest than Darius. We can be sure Daniel prayed in the lion's den because it was simply his habit. This extraordinary circumstance didn't prompt him to start praying. Prayer was already a deeply ingrained part of his life. At dawn, the king rushed to the den. Nearing the entrance, he called out in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel responded, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not harmed me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." Overjoyed, the king ordered Daniel to be lifted out of the den. To everyone's amazement, Daniel was completely unharmed, his trust in God keeping him safe. In a swift turn of events, Darius commanded that Daniel's accusers, along with their families, be thrown into the den. Before they even reached the floor, the lions overpowered them, crushing their bones. Unable to sleep, Darius must have been anxiously awaiting the dawn to learn Daniel's fate. Hearing Daniel's voice confirmed that he had indeed survived. The lions could not or would not touch this faithful servant of God. Though we don't know if Daniel physically saw the angel, he knew with certainty that God had sent an angel to protect him. Hebrews 1:14 reminds us that angels are ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. And on this occasion, God used an angel to save Daniel. God sent an angel to meet Daniel's needs, preserving him through his faith. Though Daniel was unjustly accused and his cause was righteous, those alone didn't guarantee his safety. It was his steadfast and abiding faith in God that shielded him in this perilous situation. Hebrews commemorates Daniel as one who, by faith, stopped the mouths of lions. Darius, furious with Daniel's accusers, likely would have thrown them to the lions regardless of the outcome. When the lions overpowered them before they even hit the ground, it became evident that angelic protection had truly spared Daniel. There was no natural reason why the lions had left him unharmed. In a reversal of justice, Daniel's accusers suffered the very fate they had plotted for him, illustrating a powerful biblical principle. The guilty took the place of the innocent. In response, King Darius sent a proclamation throughout his entire kingdom declaring, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel continued to prosper throughout the reign of Darius and into the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel's life exemplifies how to adapt and thrive in a foreign land while staying true to one's faith. He shows us how to balance integration with cultural resistance, adapting to new circumstances while holding firm to essential beliefs. This is a powerful lesson for contemporary Christians, many of whom live in societies where Christianity is either marginalized or even illegal. For Christians facing such challenges, Daniel's story reminds us of God's faithfulness and the importance of remaining steadfast. Despite the risks, Daniel trusted in God's protection and upheld his beliefs. Through his faith, he withstood trials that threatened his life, serving as a type of Christ in the Old Testament. Blameless like Jesus, Daniel's ordeal in the lion's den echoes Jesus' trial before Pilate, and his miraculous escape foreshadows Christ's resurrection. This is the story of Daniel and the lion's den, a story rich with lessons about faith, resilience, and God's unwavering presence. Which lesson resonates most with you? What stands out to you about Daniel's journey? If you found value in this story, please like and share your thoughts in the comments. More inspiring content is on the way, so don't forget to subscribe. You can also explore the videos on the screen to deepen your understanding of Scripture. Thanks for watching, and may the Lord bless and guide your day.